Let me start with the Guru Vandana, the had one already. Dhyanamoolam Guror Murti Pujamoolam Guru Padam Mantramoolam Guru Vakyam Mokshamoolam Guru Kripa. Dhyanamoolam Guror Murti. The focal point of dhyana or contemplation or meditation is the Guru. Puja Moolam Guru Padam. The focal point of worship is the Guru's feet. Mantra Moolam Guru Vakyam. The mantra for us is the utterance of the Guru, what he has spoken. Moksha Moolam Guru Kripa. The key to liberation is the Guru's Kripa or grace. When I was asked to speak here, I thought this was a good opportunity to visit this beautiful upcoming university, and my expectations have been fulfilled when I find this sprawling campus lush, green and aesthetically very pleasing. And I'm glad that I was provided this opportunity for being here to inaugurate this course on integral yoga in relation to health particularly. I'm told that there are two courses in the offering, one a foundation course which will be 50-hour course and another the standard 200-hour course on teaching yoga, a more advanced version of it. So I'm glad that this prestigious university is now embarking on this type of courses, and these courses will be courses with a difference because the Sri Aurobindo's and the Mother's Yoga, the integral yoga, is quite different from the popular image of yoga which tends to equate yoga with physical practices of yoga. And at the cost of repetition, which some of you might have heard, why I emphasize this is because sometimes when you speak of yoga as something more than these physical practices, people feel that, this person will speak a bit of philosophy and theory and all that, but that is just icing on the cake. Basically, hai to wahi. It's basically those physical practices, and the rest is just to make it look more impressive and more sort of prestigious topic, but basically hai to wahi. So you find yourself in a minority of one. But then it's extremely simple. I don't know why people don't understand this kind of thing, that these techniques of yoga, like asanas and pranayamas and meditation, they improve the performance of the body and the mind. And the body and the mind are mere instruments. While improving the performance of the instruments is good and necessary, but it's not sufficient. For example, a knife is also an instrument. With the same knife, you can chop fruits and vegetables, but one can also stab somebody. In the same way, the body and the mind are our instruments, and if we improve their performance through certain yogic techniques of asanas, pranayamas and meditation, then this person will be able to do whatever this person does better, because after all, whether the person is a student or a teacher or a doctor or a manager or a carpenter or a farmer, in all our work we use a combination of the body and the mind. And therefore, if the performance of the body and the mind has improved, the person will do that job better. But then you come to think of it, suppose there is a terrorist who is physically unfit, emotionally unstable and intellectually dull. Will he be able to launch a successful terrorist attack? No, he'll fail. Badi jaldi pakda jayega. So it means that if this terrorist improves the performance of his body and mind by using the techniques in yoga like the asanas, pranayamas, meditation and so on, then this person improves his chances of becoming a more successful terrorist. Now, if a discipline helps a terrorist as much as it helps a teacher, it can't be called a spiritual discipline. What makes yoga a spiritual discipline is the fact that apart from these techniques which improve the performance of the body and the mind, yoga also has guidance on how to use these instruments. And if a person follows that guidance, the person will not become a terrorist, because the guidance provided in yoga is based on a spiritual philosophy, primarily Vedanta. Now, if the person uses this guidance, he will not become a terrorist. And that is what makes yoga a spiritual discipline. Everybody says yoga is a spiritual discipline, but then it is not the techniques that make it spiritual. Techniques only improve the performance of the body and the mind. And therefore, anyone who studies integral yoga and becomes a teacher, teaching yoga, will become a teacher with a difference. So that is what one would expect from yoga teachers who emerge from this course, particularly this 200-hour course, which will make them a properly recognized standard sort of teachers who have gone through a proper course on teaching yoga. But then I was told that I should not only speak in relation to the inauguration of the course, but I should also try to align it with G20. Now, to talk about yoga integrated with health and also with G20 seemed rather difficult, but then anyone who has been a disciple of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, for that person, the gurus make it easy. Because after all, come to think of it, is there any subject under the sun about which Sri Aurobindo and the mother have not talked? And particularly when it comes to the intellectual aspect of things, Sri Aurobindo has not only talked about every subject under the sun, he has given it a very unique and timeless spiritual orientation. And that's why it is not really difficult. So what I'll try to do is to link these, and in fact linking it with G20 is what gave me the idea for the title, Breaking the Barrier Between the Material and the Spiritual. Because India, is a spiritual country. Sri Aurobindo has not only talked but shown in great detail in the foundations of Indian culture, now available under a different title, I think the Renaissance in India and other essays on Indian culture. And that volume has expanded a bit and the title has changed. But anyway, that is the book on Indian culture that Sri Aurobindo has produced through his articles in the Arya. And there he says that spirituality is the defining feature of Indian culture. Every culture, has a certain defining feature. And the defining feature of the Indian culture is spirituality. And that he illustrates by showing how spirituality permeates every aspect of Indian life and Indian activity. So he has shown how it permeates our art, our music, our dances, our architecture, and even our politics. So spirituality permeates every aspect of Indian life, and that is the defining feature of Indian culture. Now, if spirituality is the defining feature of Indian culture, what is G20? G20 is a group of 20 countries which are working for economic cooperation. Now, economic cooperation is about money and trade, which is completely material. So, India is a spiritual country, and it is part of a group of countries which are working for things like trade and money, which is all material. And on top of that, this year, our country is the host country for G20, and our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Bhai Modi, he is the President. Now, how come this combination of material and spiritual? This surprises us a bit, because somewhere in our minds we still feel that there is a dichotomy between the spiritual and the material. We see them as separate. Spirituality is something otherworldly, and because of various obligations and compulsions, we are in this world, therefore there is no time for spirituality, we can postpone it to old age. That is one of the popular views of spirituality. On the other hand, material, yes, material is all the work that we do, and we do it to make a living and so on and so forth. So that is material, and that is where the type of life in which much of our life will be spent. So this is the type of dichotomy that we have in our minds, and that is why we see how come a spiritual country becoming the president of a group of countries which are working for economic cooperation. This dichotomy in our mind is primarily because of the way India has looked at spirituality in the last 1000 years or so. And on top of that, it does not correspond to our everyday experience. So our everyday experience seems to confirm this dichotomy. Because after all, when it comes to material, we can see it, we can feel it, we can calculate it, so we can calculate money, we can count money, we can get, our bank balance and so on. So that is something which is very concrete for us. Whereas what is spirit? Yes, vaguely we may know that, well, it is the all-pervasive presence of the divine, but where is it? We don't see it. It is something theoretical, and something otherworldly. So there's a contrast between the certainty with which we see what is material and the vague sort of, at the most, a vague dim awareness that we have of what is the spirit. So because of this contrast, we can't see the two. And on top of that, during the last 1000 years or so, this idea that there is a dichotomy between worldly life and spiritual life is meant only for a select few who renounce the world, go away to the Himalayas or to a cave and sit and do something otherworldly in pursuit of God, or whatever it means. So these are the people who lead a spiritual life. For the rest of us, it is spiritual, worldly or material life. So this dichotomy has taken root during the last 1000 years or so. And 1000 years is a long time, and it's difficult for us to get rid of it. Although, if you look at the recent great men and spiritual teachers that we had in the recent past, you find that they have worked hard to abolish this dichotomy. Sri Aurobindo and the mother were among the pioneers, but then if you look at Swami Vivekananda or Mahatma Gandhi or Rabindranath Tagore, they have, and many of the recent spiritual leaders and teachers, they are all talking of the same thing, that there is no dichotomy. A person living a life in the world can also bring spirituality into his or her life. That is what they are talking about. But then something that has been at the sort of has taken hold of our psyche in the last 1000 years or so will not easily go away. So on one hand is the practical experience of something concrete which is material and something which is very vague, which is spiritual, and on top of that this idea of this dichotomy having taken root in our hearts and minds over the last 1000 years. The result is that this dichotomy we see, and therefore we see this conflict as if between India being a spiritual country and on the other hand being the president of a group of 20 nations working for economic cooperation. But then this is not how it always was. Let me start with one basic concept, and that is how this world came into being. Now you'll say that now he is going astray. Kahan se kahan jump kar raha hai. But there is a reason why I am doing that. Before the material universe existed, after all there was something there, and that something was something that has always been there and will always be there. It's imperishable and constant, and it was there. That is a given in all spiritual philosophies. That's the root of all spirituality, that something existed before anything else existed. But then the material universe didn't exist, so it was a non-material entity. And that non-material entity knew everything and could do everything. Knowing and doing are a part of what we call consciousness. So what existed was a consciousness. And this consciousness was the supreme consciousness because it knew everything and could do everything. Call it by any name, call it God, call it the divine, or call it by any other name, but it was that entity which was there. But it was a non-material entity. Now since it could do everything, one day it decided that there should be a material universe. But then although it could do everything, for creating a material universe at least you need some material. For example, if you tell a carpenter to make a table or this podium, you have to provide wood. So wood is the material, carpenter is the creator, and this podium is the creation. Now here the creator was there, who wanted to create the material universe, but had no material available. But then this creator could do everything. So what it did was it itself became the material. It could do that also. So the creator became the creation. So in that sense, who was the first barrier breaker? The divine itself, because started as a non-material entity and became a material entity. So that was the first barrier breaker. So that is where the identity of the material and the non-material, one can say, began. And what was the corollary of this? The corollary of this naturally is that the divine permeates everything. For example, suppose a child starts with a square piece of paper, folds it and makes a boat out of it. Now if you ask the child, does the boat have paper? The child will say, what a ridiculous question. The paper itself has become the boat. So every bit of the boat is paper. So in the same way, the creator itself became the creation. It became the material universe. So as a corollary, every bit of the universe, every atom, every electron here of matter is nothing but the creator itself in another form. The form has changed from non-material to material, and therefore where is the barrier? So that was the first barrier breaker, the divine itself. But then what it proves is that firstly, material is necessary and useful. Otherwise, why did it have to do it? Which means that for doing certain things which the divine wanted to do in this world, that firm material base was important. It was necessary and it has served a purpose. So therefore, material is not to be rejected as something of an inferior order. It's just that the supreme consciousness is somewhere hidden in it. It is dormant, but all the same it is there. It is the same supreme consciousness which has taken this form. The one who knew everything and could do everything has taken on an appearance which seems to know nothing and can do nothing. But it is only an appearance, an outer appearance. And secondly, that this material is nothing but the divine itself. It's another form, and therefore it has to be looked at with the same respect. As Sri Aurobindo says in his Upanishad, Jagadapi Brahma Satyam Na Mithya. Jagadapi Brahma, the Jagat or universe is also Brahma. It's also the divine. Satyam Na Mithya, therefore it is truth. It is not a mithya or a falsehood or an illusion. It may be illusory in nature, in the sense that it looks different from what it is, but all the same, it is the truth. Because the universe is also nothing but the Brahma itself. Jagadapi Brahma Satyam Na Mithya. And the third thing is that it is not all just sort of something which we have created out of sort of as a result of an intellectual exercise in philosophizing. Indian philosophy is not based on speculation. It's not purely a mental exercise, unlike much of Western philosophy. Indian philosophy is rooted in experience. We start with experience and then we try to make more sense of this experience by fitting it into a philosophy. So philosophy is secondary, it comes after the experience. And this philosophy which I am talking about, which is primarily Vedanta, the creator becoming the creation, this philosophy is rooted in the experience of the rishis, which we find in the Upanishads. And in our tradition, it's not that the Upanishads are a set of books which were created thousands of years ago and after that it stopped. In the Vedantic tradition, anybody has the freedom to go on a spiritual quest even today and try and acquire your own insights. And then if you feel like giving a shape to your experience, you can give it a shape in the form of words and it will become one more Upanishad. So it hasn't stopped with certain, even today there are more than 100 Upanishads which still exist, which have survived after thousands of years, and 10 of them are considered the principal Upanishads, but that has not stopped anyone else from creating another Upanishad, and Sri Aurobindo has done it. He has one Upanishad in the Sanskrit language, all one, from which I quoted Jagadapi Brahma Satyam Na Mithya. And if you look at it, what is the life divine? It's a combination of an Upanishad and philosophy. It has both. It has the experience and it has he has woven it into his own version of Vedanta, which we can call, and this term, a very noted scholar has used, David Frawley, he has used this term, integral Vedanta. He calls it integral Vedanta, which you find in the life divine. And What is Savitri? Savitri is another Upanishad, yet another Upanishad. It has the spiritual experiences of Sri Aurobindo, spiritual experiences of the mother, and then on top of that also the philosophy which emerges from these spiritual experiences, and it also has for us, most useful artists, it has for us a guidance on, for sadhana, how we can walk the path of integral yoga. That also Savitri has. So that means Savitri is also an Upanishad plus, more than an Upanishad. So Sri Aurobindo has created not one but three Upanishads, one in the Sanskrit language and two in English. So even today nobody has, you can't stop anybody from creating yet one more scripture. That is the type of free and liberal tradition we have. You can question the spiritual masters who created the Upanishads, say I don't trust them, I want to go on my personal spiritual quest, you can do it, and create one more Upanishad. So that is the type of freedom that we have. That's the beauty of this culture. So anyway, I'm digressing a bit, but what I'm trying to say is that the abolition of this dichotomy between the material and the spiritual, which was initiated by the divine itself, starting as a non-material entity, becoming material, shows firstly that matter is useful and necessary. It can do certain things which a non-material entity cannot do. That's why the divine created it. And to create it itself became that. So that was only when no other material was available. Then, second thing that it shows is that the two are the same. The material is the same as the divine itself. And thirdly, that it is not all spiritual philosophy that we are talking about, intellectual speculation. It is based on the experience of the rishis, the spiritual masters, and they have existed in all traditions, across traditions. In the Hindu tradition we call them the rishis, in the Islamic tradition we call them the Sufis, and in the Christian and Judaic tradition we call them the mystics. So they existed across traditions, across geographical barriers, across periods of time. They existed they have been there thousands of years ago, and they continue to be there even today. Even today, more rishis can be born. So that is something which is rooted in experience. At any point in time, people who go to the level of acquiring that experience will be only a few and far between. That is true. But then a few will keep emerging from time to time as they have been for thousands of years. That will keep happening. So this is sort of the breaking of the barrier. But then what are the practical implications of it? Okay, this is not all speculation, it is rooted in experience, but experience of a few and far between rishis and the mystics and the Sufis and so on. But what are the practical implications for ordinary people like us? Firstly, that first thing that has a practical implication is that there is no real dichotomy between worldly life and spiritual life. Because the two are the same, this world is also the divine itself. Secondly, that there is no dichotomy is also not theory. Because India has done it in the past. This idea that the two are separate started emerging around 1,000 years ago, probably around 2,000 years ago. By 1,000 years ago it was deeply entrenched, and it was further accentuated by slavery. So it became even stronger by the time we became independent. Not only this idea became stronger, but it also was covered with a lot of ignorance because of the damage which particularly the British did to our system of education. So the result was that that idea got fossilized. The idea of a dichotomy which had been growing over the last 1,000 years or so, that got fossilized and got deeply rooted. But then one thing remarkable you'll still see, that the basic fact that spirituality is the soul of the nation, that is the defining feature of Indian culture, even today it persists. It has not really died. It has gone to sleep, but it has not died. Even a man in the street today, an illiterate man, doesn't take long to come up with things like this. Bhagwan to kan karne hai. God is there everywhere, in everything. Not only that, everything that happens here is the result of God's will. And if it is the result of God's will, there must be something good in it. And if I am suffering, it is perhaps because of my karmas. If not karmas in this life, maybe karmas in a previous life. Now what is all this? All this is rooted in Vedanta. And which means that some basic features of spiritual philosophy permeate every Indian's life, even in immigrating India. So it has not died. It's just that it has gone to sleep, and in our practical life, we have started seeing that dichotomy. It has got deeply entrenched, but on the other hand, some basic things have still survived all these years of not only oblivion during the last 1,000 years, it has survived all the attacks and criticism that this country's culture received primarily because of first slavery. So all that it has survived, and still the man in the street still says all these things just at the drop of a hat. So it has survived. So anyway, not that, but we let us look at the really bright side of it. Till about 1,000 years ago, when this started sort of taking deep roots, India was second to none in the world, not only as a prosperous nation, but also as a nation which was highly educated and also one of the richest nations in every sense of the word, even in science and technology. So whether it was prosperity, whether it was science and technology, or whether it was education. People from far off lands came to this country till about 1,000 years ago, from China, from the Middle East, from Europe. They all came here to learn. So we were on top of everything, in every sphere, in spite of spirituality being also the hallmark of this culture. Which means that we were materially at the top in every respect, and certainly we cannot say that India was any less spiritual then than it is today. So we were at the peak in both the spiritual sphere and the material sphere, which means that abolishing this dichotomy is not a theoretical concept. India has done it till about 1,000 years ago. You may say, well, it might have done it till 1,000 years ago, but is it possible today? Now, that is the experiment that Sri Aurobindo and the mother did. Pondicherry became a sort of a laboratory where it was tested whether this type of a thing can be done in today's world. And it was a successful experiment. In fact, people who visited the Sri Aurobindo ashram in Pondicherry in its early days in the 1930s and 40s, as the founder of Sri Aurobindo ashram, Delhi branch did, he went there in 1939 for the first time. They were surprised. They started asking, is this really the ashram? Doesn't look like an ashram. No bhajan, no kirtan, no shiksha, no diksha, no dress code. What sort of an ashram is this? On top of that, boys and girls going around in shorts, in white shorts. What sort of an ashram is this? Because this is not that idea of an ashram which we had. So it was a revolutionary type of an ashram. And the idea was to see whether you can bring spirituality into worldly life. So everything that happened in the outside world was happening there, like having a school there, a health center there, and now you can see so many departments came up one by one, making fabrics and embroidery and tailoring and whatnot. I mean, agarbattis. You can see many of those things. Something started then, some things have started later. So, also if you come to the Delhi ashram, again the focus is on education and healthcare. Now these are the type of things which happen also in the outside world. But yet, in these places, they are done in a different spirit, and therefore in spite of this worldly activity going on there, it is done differently, and the place still retains an intensely spiritual atmosphere. That is the type of atmosphere this place will also acquire over time, I'm sure. So education is a worldly activity, but still it can have that character. And that is what one expects from a university like this coming up, because after all, it's not that this has to exist only in ashrams, not even in ashrams named after Sri Aurobindo and the mother, but can exist also in a university. Why not? Because the name doesn't matter whether you call it an ashram or call it a university, that doesn't really matter. It is the inspiration behind it, the spirit behind it, the idea that spirituality can permeate every aspect of life. That is what matters. So, it had been done in India till 1,000 years ago, and it can be done also in today's world. That is what the Pondicherry experiment demonstrated. Now, let's say, well, it was possible then, it is possible now, but then what do we get out of it? We can do the same things as Europe has done in the last 400 years. They developed science, they developed technology, then they came the Industrial Revolution, and the result is that they became prosperous, and they have been amongst the most successful nations in the world, and that is how their culture today seems to dominate the world. So if all that is possible without without bringing spirituality into life, then why do we have to bring it? You can, India was at top of the world when it was spiritual. Europe was at the top of the world. Europe and North America have been at the top of the world in the last few hundred years. So if it can be done with spirituality and without spirituality, why do we have to bring spirituality into it? Now, firstly, if we talk about the Western experiment, we call it an experiment over the last 400 years or so, yes, they went through the dark ages and then came the Renaissance, and during the Renaissance, rationality was placed on the highest pedestal, and that's how modern science and technology developed, and the rest followed. That is true. But then, when they placed rationality on the pedestal, and it gave this resounding success within a relatively brief period of a few hundred years, which came to dominate the culture all over the world to some extent, there was this euphoria created that why not use the same tool of rationality to solve the problems of human existence, like misery and suffering. Sansar is dukkha, that's what Lord Buddha said. So that has been a fact which has existed for thousands of years again. That is again not something new. So they said, why not bring that to solve these problems? Science and technology by itself did not do it. That was quite obvious. Because the division between the rich and the poor, and therefore cruelty, misery and suffering, that continued even in Europe. So then they pressed this tool of rationality in other spheres. Let's take one important sphere in which it was pressed, and that was politics. That's how they got two alternative systems of government, communism and democracy. They also came up a little after Renaissance, during that period. Now, if you look at both these contrasting systems, they are both very well intentioned. The intentions are to wipe out misery and suffering from the world. And they are also both very rational. Who can argue with the argument? Who can argue or sort of say that there is anything wrong with the concept of handing over the power to the people, and the people will elect their own representatives, and that runs the country? That is democracy. That's how you can bring equality into the world, if you hand over the power to the people. And the other side is that you have a system in which the government has the upper hand, but the government works on the principle from each according to his capacity to each according to his needs. Now, who can have an argument with that? That's how you achieve equality. That is what communism is. But then, as Sri Aurobindo has said very beautifully in the human cycle, that the three basic ideas which both these developments actually cherished were enshrined in the slogan of the French Revolution: liberty, equality and fraternity. And there is an internal contradiction between liberty and equality. If you give too much liberty, you cannot have equality. And that's what happened in democracies. And if you try to enforce equality, you will have to take away liberties, which is what happened in communism. And both these experiments therefore failed. But then the key word is fraternity. Now, fraternity means brotherhood, universal brotherhood and sisterhood. Now, that is the key. If you can have that, then liberty and equality will automatically both follow. Because I can't be well fed myself and keep my brothers and sisters starved, so equality will be there. I can't be myself free and keep my brothers and sisters in chains, so automatically liberty will be ensured. You'll have both liberty and equality if you have fraternity. But then, at the present level of consciousness of the human race, true fraternity is not possible. So the root cause of all human suffering is the level of consciousness, the human consciousness. And till that goes up, we'll keep trying all different solutions, including those based on rationality, and they'll all fail. But in these failed experiments, again in the same work, Sri Aurobindo says, Human Cycle and the Idea of Human Unity, they are a twin work. In one of these, he says that all these failed experiments would have taught the West a lesson. What is the lesson? That rationality does not work. It cannot solve the problems of human existence. So from these failures, the lesson that they will learn will teach them to look at something which is higher than rationality. And then where will they look? They look to India. They look to ancient Indian wisdom. That is where you find the true key to something higher than reason guiding your life. That is what spirituality is about. Spirituality is something higher than reason guiding your life. That will be one way of looking at spirituality. And that is why the West is so highly receptive to, has been so receptive to ancient Indian knowledge. And in that sense, Swami Vivekananda's visit to Chicago in 1893 can be considered a sort of a landmark. It was a landmark in this area. Europe had become quite receptive, and that is why he was so well received in 1893. And from that point onwards, there has been no looking back. The interest in ancient Indian wisdom has been growing in the West exponentially since then. So that is why they are highly receptive to our wisdom. So what do we get out of it? That's what I started with. What do we get if you can progress materially when you are spiritual as India did till 1,000 years ago? If you can progress materially keeping spirituality out as the Western world did during the last few hundred years, then why do we have to bring spirituality? Material progress is possible both ways. Material progress may be possible both ways, but ultimately what we want is happiness. What we want is wiping out misery and suffering from the world. That does not happen with rationality. That can happen only with spirituality. And that is why India was a happier nation. Even till 1,000 years ago, we were not only top on the material sphere, we were a much happier nation than what the West became when it founded its material progress only on rationality. So we were a much happier nation. We were a much happier society. So ultimately we want happiness. And why does that happen? That happens because when you bring spirituality into your everyday life, there are a few things that happen. One thing is that you start making choices in life which are based on love. Because you're responding to your inner voice coming from your soul. If you reject the soul, you can't listen to the voice of the soul. And rationality does not have any place for the soul. The materialistic way of looking at the life, as Europe did during the European Renaissance, does not have any place for the soul. One of the early scientists, Pascal, he said that well, God may be there, but I have no place for him. I don't need him. Something to that effect. So it has no place. So where was I? Now we're talking about the soul. So when we bring spirituality into worldly life, we are taking into account that voice emerging from the soul, and that leads us to choices which are based on love. Because at the level of the soul, we are all one. Our separation into individuals is only a partial separation. In the simplest of terms, we are all children of the same God. So therefore, we are all interrelated. We are not really separate, we are one. Now if we are one, that is sort of based on the spiritual view of life, then automatically, if we are one, we love one another. If we love one another, our choices in life are based on that love. And what does that love lead to? Leads to an expression in the form of giving what we have to those who need it. And there is a certain degree of joy associated with giving. There is also a certain degree of joy associated with receiving love. And that's how what we get from that approach is immense joy. And the person who gives, because he rejected the alternative which might have made this person self-centered or selfish, because he rejected those choices, this person also gets lasting mental peace. In contrast, if he responds to those choices which are based on selfish, egoistic considerations, this person does feel a little guilty, feels uneasy, gets recurrent uneasiness. So instead of this guilt and recurrent uneasiness, the person gets the joy of giving and lasting mental peace. So that is what we get as individuals. And what do we get as a society? We get a society which is a happier society, a society in which there is less of suffering. So it helps the individual and it helps the others. Now, this is a good opportunity, a moment to also link it to health, because when a person gets joy and lasting mental peace, repeatedly as a result of the choices that the person is making, the person has good mental health. And now the mind-body relationship is on a sound scientific footing, and we know that if the person is happy, he is more likely to be also healthy, and if this person falls sick, then this person is likely to recover faster and more completely. So it gives good health. So the person is happier and also healthier. Now we sometimes look at health in isolation. If I do these physical practices like asanas and pranayamas and so on, I become healthy. Now that neglects the fact that one cannot be truly healthy just by doing these techniques. For being truly healthy, we also need to be happy. In fact, it is mind over matter in this area. You can take care of all the physical factors like exercise and diet and so on, smoking, drinking, sleep, all those physical factors have some importance. I'm not saying that, but all the same, you can take care of all those things, but if the person is basically an unhappy person, this person is under chronic stress, still the person is likely to be quite unhealthy. On the other hand, if you take care of the psychological factors, you can get away with some of the transgressions when it comes to physical factors. Because after all, who can live a life which is completely satisfactory from the point of view of these physical factors like diet, exercise, etc. There are basically two reasons why we can't be perfect in those areas. We can't be perfect partly because of ignorance, because nobody really knows what the perfect diet is and so on. We can't be sure. So partly it is ignorance. We do not even know what the rest of the world knows. We can't know what the world knows, and the world does not know everything. But therefore we are partly because of ignorance, but even more than ignorance, we are making mistakes with respect to the physical factors in lifestyle because of compulsions of daily life. We do not have the time to even live those factors properly. We don't have time for exercise, we don't have enough time to sleep, and sometimes we want to eat in a hurry, and therefore there's no time to even eat a healthy diet. Healthy diet takes time, more time also to eat. You have to eat it slowly, and it is more difficult to chew. It takes longer to eat a healthy diet. So who wants to eat a diet which is less palatable and takes longer? So there are compulsions in daily life which make us make mistakes, some deliberately, some because of ignorance when it comes to physical factors. But you can get away with some of those if you are basically a healthy person. Mind over matter. So we can be happier and healthier. So this is one of the things that we get from it as individuals, and we get a better society. Now all this actually basically comes to consciousness, because we make choices. When we make choices from a higher level of the soul, we are acting from the higher reaches of our consciousness. We are not acting purely from the mental consciousness. We are acting from a level higher than the ordinary mental. We are listening to the soul, which is at a higher level than what is expressed or manifest as the mind. The soul is behind the mind, but then the way it is expressed, the way the mind is expressed, normally does not reflect the light of the soul fully, because there is a sort of a barrier, a screen between the two, and the result is that our mind basically revolves around the ego. And the ego is a separative principle, whereas the soul would guide us towards choices which are based on love. Love is a uniting principle. So there is a contrast, a conflict between the ordinary ego and love. Ego is a separative force, love is a uniting force. So because of this contrast, we find that the person who is guiding his life by the egoistic considerations is making a different type of different type of choices, and that may seem better to that person because it's leading to some immediate gains. Maybe it's leading to some enjoying some fleeting sensory pleasures, but in the long run, this person finds that making those choices makes this person feel guilty, makes this person feel uneasy, makes this person get recurrent uneasiness. In contrast, the person who is making those choices from a higher level of consciousness, higher than the ordinary mental, is making choices which are based on love or a stretched out ego, which means that is now he's looking at his self as a wider self. It has the sphere of his ego has expanded and stretched, which you can look at it either way. This applies to yoga also. Yoga, first you learn to relax, then you learn to stretch, and then comes the strengthening. So here also, first you relax the ego. It's not only about yourself, you make it a little diffuse and relaxed. And then you expand it, stretch, include more and more in that circle. And if this circle keeps expanding and you include everyone, then where is the boundary? Then there's no boundary, the boundary is, so that is what the collapse of the ego barrier, as we call it. It collapses first through relaxation, then stretching, and then full expansion. So that is the way it goes. Anyway, so this person has acted from a higher level of consciousness. So that has made this person happier and healthier, and also created a better world. That's why the Mother has said, that the conditions under which people live, the conditions under which men live, is a function of their consciousness. It's a function of the level of consciousness. So that is what leads to a better life and a better world. Now, I thought a few words, especially for the students at this point. I was told that the majority of the students in Auro University are students in the Department of Business Studies. So let me see, out of those who are here, how many are in business studies? Very few. So the majority of the students in the university are in business studies. Majority of the students in this hall are not from business studies. Which means that people in business thought, हमें क्या करना जाके हैं, वहाँ तो spirituality की बातें होंगी. So they did not see that, they still saw the dichotomy and decided not to come. In contrast, those who came were the ones who belonged to the departments where probably these courses will be happening. So the teacher said, आना तो दे. Kiran ji said, teacher ने कहा आना तो इसलिए आ गए. So that's how you turned up here. But then if you come to look at business in broader terms, today everything is a business. Education is business, health is business. We started talking in terms of the health industry and the education industry, business. Now, why have we started calling this? These are noble professions. How is it that in this country where nothing was a business once upon a time, because spirituality permeated everything, today everything has become a business? What is the contrast? The contrast is that when spirituality permeated every aspect of Indian life, the life was founded on 4 basic pillars. That's the simplest way to understand. What were those 4 pillars? Kama, that is desires. Having some desires is legitimate. Second was Artha. Artha is the means for satisfying those desires. Money and whatever other resources are required for satisfying those desires. To procure those resources, even to accumulate them to some extent, was all permitted. Artha. But the third pillar was Dharma. Dharma is not religion. Dharma means the sense of right and wrong. Which means that fulfill your desires, accumulate the resources for satisfying those desires, but within the framework of what is right and wrong, not any which way. And why was it necessary? Because the ultimate aim of life is moksha. That was the 4th pillar, which is liberation. Now, though moksha is not only after death, there is certain type of liberation which is possible in this life, in this world. And what is that liberation? The liberation is from the normal bondages of which are rooted in the ego. Like, say, first one is desires. So you're starting with desire, and moksha, you are eliminating the desires. That in fact is true liberation. Because so long as you are ruled by desires, the life is dominated by desires, you are not free. Which means you are dependent upon certain things and certain people for your happiness. All dependence is lack of freedom. Whereas the aim is to overcome dependence on people and things. So how will that be possible? That will be possible if you fulfill your desires and accumulate the means to satisfy them within the framework of right and wrong. This is something which even rationalists have realized without going deep into spirituality. It was Milton who said that no good man became suddenly rich. Which means that if you are basically a good person, a spiritual person, you are also a good person. If you are really a good person, you will never grow suddenly rich. So which means that Kama and Artha are legitimate, are permitted, but you will not grow very rich suddenly. If you keep in your mind the considerations of right and wrong. Now what has happened today is, unfortunately, in this spiritual country, that the focus has become Kama and Artha. We have forgotten Dharma and Moksha. That is how even health and education have become an industry. So in that sense, no matter which department you belong to, all of you can look forward to entering some sort of a business, even if you are not studying business studies. Even if you become a yoga teacher, that can also become a business. Spirituality itself is big business today in the world. And that is why people are wondering, how do we know who is a real guru and who is a fake guru? Spirituality is big business. So everything has become a business. So irrespective of which department you are coming from, business is relevant. And that is why I thought, let me make this point that what you have to do is, whether you are in business or whether you are not in business, so in traditional business, you have to see that it is not the type of business in which we Kama and Artha dominate. It is not the type of business in which you see no place for spirituality. So you can bring spirituality into whatever you enter, including what is business. So one of the first things that I thought I can talk about when I'm talking to the students particularly is that you can bring spirituality into everything, irrespective of which department you are studying and what you end up doing. But where do we begin? I think one of the best beginnings can be to have a little greater respect for material objects. That itself is materialism. The mother said, no, I'm a thorough materialist. I respect all material objects. She kept all her objects which she used with great care. She kept them very clean, well organized. She used them very gently. And matter has a consciousness. It may not be visible, but matter has consciousness, it responds. It is a common experience that if you use a certain machine, be it a car or whatever it is, a car is also a machine. If you handle it gently, if you love it genuinely, it will work much better, it will last much longer. Even if it's your dress, phatega nahi jaldi if you handle it with respect and care. Whether it's kapda or whether it's a machine, material objects do have that consciousness. So, first thing, if we have to respect matter, dissolve that barrier between the material and the spiritual, is to handle material objects with care, respect, give them the type of looking after that they need, and that can be a beginning. Second thing that can be done is that career we do need. Kama and Artha, okay, so we do need a career, but then along with the career, one can also look for meaning in life. Because it's possible to address the highest goal in life through the work that you are doing. That is what bringing spirituality into daily life can be about. So irrespective of what work you are doing, spirituality can be brought into it, and that's how your career combines in itself giving meaning to your life. What can be better than making a living and also addressing the purpose of life simultaneously? And it can be done. Which means that for that, we have to have a certain clear-cut goal in life. As Kiranji also said, we have to have an aim in life. That's what the mother has said, we should all have an aim in life, because an aimless life is a miserable life. So any aim is better than no aim at all. But then the mother goes on to say, on the quality of your aim will depend the quality of your life. So it means you should have a high quality aim to have a high quality life. And what is that high quality aim? She goes on to say that high quality aim is high and wide, generous and disinterested. Now if you combine these four, high and wide, generous and disinterested, you come to basically one conclusion which knits all the four, and that is look beyond yourself. High, because when you look from a higher plane, then we find that we are all one. If we are all one, you are looking beyond your little self. Wide, expansion. So if you expand yourself from a single individual, then your little self to expand, include more. So again, you are thinking of others. So high and wide. Generous, there's no point just looking from a higher plane and seeing we are all one, expanding and saying we are all one if you don't express it through your love for those whom you have included. So if you include them in that circle and you are loving them, you'll express that love by giving and giving generously. So high and wide, generous. And then when you are doing that, you're not thinking of your little self. So you are doing it in a disinterested manner. Disinterested is a word which is commonly misunderstood. People think disinterested means not taking any interest. बिना रुचि के काम करो. Don't take interest in what you are doing. That's not what it means. For that there is a different word in the English language. And what is that? Uninterested. There is a difference between being uninterested and disinterested. Uninterested means taking no interest in what you are doing. Disinterested means doing what you are doing without keeping your personal interest in mind. अपने स्वार्थ का सोचे बगैर जो काम करते हैं, that is disinterested work. So निष्काम कर्म. निष्काम कर्म is disinterested. So again, which means that your high and wide and generous aim acquires meaning only if you are not expecting anything in return for yourself. If you are expecting something in return for yourself, then again the focus becomes once again narrow. You are looking only at your little self. So then high, wide and generous lose their meaning. So that is why all four combine into one: high, wide, generous and disinterested, just looking beyond yourself, including more in your circle, and that gives you your aim in life. Which means that no matter which career you take up, don't take it up only thinking of what I will get out of it, how much money I will make, how comfortably I will live, maybe me and at the most my immediate family, like husband, wife and children. So don't think in those terms. Think of something which you are looking at from a higher plane, which includes more, it's wider, expressed by giving generously and not thinking of yourself. Forget yourself to actually discover yourself as this way. So it is interesting. So all four combined, that should be the aim in life. And that can be combined with a career. That can be brought into the work that you are doing. So that's how you are making a living becomes one with living a purposeful life with a high aim. And if the aim is high, the quality of your life will be high. Now you may say that, well, if we do that, then there could be difficulties. Yes, difficulties will be there. Difficulties from outside and difficulties from within. Difficulties from within because we are still primarily rooted in the mental consciousness, and therefore sometimes you will feel that probably what I am doing is not in my best interests. That sometimes that feeling will be there. And there will be difficulties from outside. You'll feel you are the odd one out. Not many others may be living a life like that, so you'll feel I am the odd one out. And that itself makes us sometimes uncomfortable at the mental level of consciousness. We have to learn to be the odd ones out. And for that you need a courage of conviction. You'll be the odd ones out. It's quite possible. And Sri Aurobindo says that heaven's call is rare. Rarer are those who respond to it. So in any case, not many get the call, and those who respond to it are rare. So you will be rare, and the odd ones. Why that has happened? Again, Sri Aurobindo says in Savitri somewhere, to be like everybody else is what most people want. So you don't want to be the odd one out. So then you have to have that courage of conviction to be the odd one out. Otherwise, you will be as miserable as the rest of the world is. It's as simple as that. So, firstly, you will be the odd ones out. Secondly, you will be criticized. You will be criticized by those who are your well-wishers, your friends, your relatives. They all criticize you. Sometimes they'll say that you are wasting your education. Sometimes they'll say that you are being stupid. And they are your well-wishers. Why will they say it? Because you see, the way they look at you, things, depends on the level of their consciousness. And the majority is living at the physical, vital level, and at the most at the level of the unrefined mental, the crude mental. Now the crude mental has a tendency to calculate. You can calculate the bank balance, but you cannot calculate consciousness. You are rising in consciousness, by how many meters or kilometers or kilograms consciousness has gone up? You can't measure it. You can't measure joy. How many kilos of joy? You can't measure it. How much of lasting mental peace? You can't measure peace. So you are getting intangible benefits which from the ordinary mental consciousness cannot be seen. And that's why even your well-wishers who are thinking in terms of concrete terms, they will call you sometimes that you are not doing the right thing, sometimes call you stupid and so on. So that will also happen. You will be criticized. So you should be prepared for that. But then it's only one who is at a higher plane can understand those who are speaking from a lower plane, The person on the lower plane, for that person it is difficult to understand what is happening at the higher plane. So it becomes your duty to understand them, see the intention behind it. The intention is good, they love you, but then the love will be expressed from the level of their consciousness, and majority lives at that consciousness, physical, vital and the lower mental. Majority lives at that level, and therefore they will consider you stupid. For example, I mean, Sri Aurobindo, when he gave up his IAS career, he didn't want to do IAS and came back, he would have received the same type of criticism if his father had been alive. Somehow nature ensured that he should be able to do what he wants to do, or Sri Aurobindo wants to do, and therefore took his father away before he arrived. He gave up his IAS career. After being at Baroda, he could have lived in luxury. He was getting a fantastic, fabulous salary of around 500 rupees a month, which was a fabulous salary those days. He could have lived in luxury as a teacher at Baroda, not an IAS officer. That also he gave up. So now when he went on giving up one thing after another, accepted 1/3 the salary that he was getting to come to Calcutta as the principal of National College. Gave up even that the salary at National College within a year so that he could be full-time in the freedom struggle. So he went on giving up one thing after another from the point of view of mental consciousness. To go on giving up one thing after another would be considered something foolish. But then he was coming from a higher plane. So you have to, at the higher plane have to understand, those who are looking at the ordinary mental plane will not understand. That famous prayer of the Saint Francis of Assisi that says, God grant that I may understand rather than be understood. Don't expect to be understood, you have to understand if you are acting from the higher plane. So you have to be prepared for being the odd one out, you have to be prepared for this type of criticism, and you just have to be sure that you are doing the right thing. So nearing the end now, the time is also probably already running out. So let me now again come to G20. Now G20 is about economic cooperation. One word I think which needs to emphasize here is cooperation. To move from being self-centered as an individual only finds at the national level an expression of being self-centered at the national level. Now here there is a group of 20 nations talking about cooperating rather than competing with each other, competing with one another. That itself is a big advance. That is one little step towards spirituality even within that economic sphere. They are talking of cooperation, not competition. Cooperation comes from a higher level of consciousness than competition. Survival of the fittest, which is about competition, was at the early stages of evolution. At the later stages, particularly from human being onward, it has been replaced by survival through coexistence. Coexistence has replaced competition, and cooperation belongs to the field of coexistence, not competition. So that itself is a big advance. So when Sri Aurobindo talks about the human unity and eventually having a world government, when he talks about that in the idea of human unity, he says that the future of the world is in human unity, which will be not through military conquest, that one powerful country conquering the others, but it will be a psychological unity. It will be based on a psychological unity. Now that psychological unity would be based on a spiritual foundation. It would have a spiritual foundation. It is because of the oneness that we feel in spite of the differences, and therefore these differences and diversity will be respected. While retaining and respecting this diversity and differences, there will be a unity inspired by a sense of oneness. So it will be based on psychological unity. And we saw that some preliminary shuffling experiments in that direction had already started, and they were going to fail, that also he had foreseen, but all the same these were steps in that direction. And what were those? The League of Nations, the United Nations. And today if he had been there, he would have also seen groups like G20 in the same light. These are groups of nations coming together, taking shuffling steps towards that oneness, inspired by a spiritual foundation, leading to a world unity and eventually a world government. Human unity leading to a world government. So he would have seen even things like G20 in that direction, and the word cooperation is important. Another indication that it is a step in the same direction which Sri Aurobindo and the mother saw as the future of the world, the human consciousness going up perceptibly within a relatively short time and leading to a much better world. That optimism Sri Aurobindo and mother have not only visualized but given us an assurance it is bound to happen. So another indication that things like G20 are poised in the direction is not only the word cooperation, but very soon they saw that they can't restrict themselves to just economic cooperation. That will be closely linked to other issues, and they have started looking at those other issues also, which are now also on the agenda of G20. Things like sustainable development, climate issues, and climate change, environmental issues, and don't forget, last but not least, anti-corruption. They started looking at corruption as also one of the topics which is linked closely to economic cooperation. The countries should cooperate so that corruption which is possible because of, say, people making use of the boundaries between countries for economic offences, that can be prevented if the countries cooperate, keep their selfish interest out, and help one another. These countries help one another in preventing the type of corruption which requires these geographical boundaries. So we break down those boundaries to prevent this type of economic crimes, corruption. So they have started talking about that also. Corruption is one of the worst manifestations of the low level of consciousness, and so once again they've started talking about it. And in fact, the talks on corruption concluded only yesterday, from the 1st to the 3rd March. These talks on corruption and the satellite event of the G20 summit were going on very near Delhi in Gurugram for 3 days. So, talking about not just economic cooperation but also about sustainable development, climate change, environmental issues, and corruption shows that these are steps in the direction of a better world towards a human unity, and therefore, in fact, there's no absolutely not only no conflict between a spiritual country like India being the president of G20 this year. In fact, this is the way it should be if these developments like G20 have to eventually move in the direction in which Aurobindo had anticipated in the ideal of humanity towards human unity and a world government. So these are small steps in that direction, and for that, India's involvement, India's contribution as a spiritual nation are extremely important. And finally, about breaking barriers, I think I've talked enough to show that there really need be no barrier between the material and the spiritual. In fact, Sri Aurobindo was himself a great barrier breaker, and whether it was in the field of freedom struggle or whether it was in the field of spirituality, he broke barriers. In the freedom struggle, he broke a barrier when he questioned the very idea that a country like India will never be able to overthrow the British, because that was the dominant idea till then, that they are too powerful to be thrown, so let's keep just pleading for small concessions from them. That was the dominant idea. He said no, not only for India's sake, for the sake of the world, this country should be completely free, Purna Swaraj. He was the one who gave this slogan of Purna Swaraj, and also made a blueprint for it, that we can achieve it not through an armed conflict but through non-cooperation. He was the first one to do a detailed blueprint of a 5-point non-cooperation or boycott. So he was a barrier breaker in the freedom struggle. In spirituality, again, he was a barrier breaker, because he was the one who firstly broke the barrier of the dichotomy between worldly life and spiritual life after a gap of about 1,000 years in this country. So he was a pioneer in terms of breaking that barrier, and made a very powerful case, an emphatic and sometimes seemingly an emotional and passionate case for a life affirming spirituality. Even more than that, he was the first spiritual master perhaps in this world to have thought of spirituality in terms of evolution of human consciousness leading to a better world. To set that as the goal for spirituality, to see that inevitable development which can be accelerated by human cooperation is something no spiritual master had done before him. So in that sense, he was again a barrier breaker. He thought out of the box. His thinking was completely revolutionary. And it was because of this revolutionary thinking that he is sometimes not understood. As times go by, he'll be better understood, but then the human race needs at least a few hundred more years of work to even understand his vision properly and to give it a practical shape. So by just his worldly existence for just about 78 years, he has generated centuries of work, homework for the entire human race. And what will that lead to, that homework? A complete reshaping of the human race, complete sort of a thorough makeover of the human race, so that instead of being an ego-driven species, man will become a love-driven species, and this world will become a better world. That is the type of homework he is left for all of us. The change is inevitable, it is bound to happen because of evolutionary thrust, but human being is the only creature who can collaborate with nature by each one of us working for a rise in our own consciousness, because numbers matter. If each one contributes just by rising a little in consciousness, the average depends on the numbers. The average goes up. When the average goes up, that average starts determining the way the world is run. So the affairs of the world will be run from that higher plane of consciousness. Once there is a sufficient number, once that threshold has been crossed, and that is when we find that the basic problems of human existence, like inequality, injustice, misery and suffering, they will disappear from this world. So that is the future of the world. And Sri Aurobindo's vision finds expression in some of the most beautiful lines in Savitri, in Book 3, Canto 4, where he says, I saw the omnipotent warriors. I saw the omnipotent flaming pioneers. The pioneers coming down with those flames, forerunners of a divine multitude. Multitude number is looking in terms of numbers. A few examples here and there will be always there. That is what all our rishis and saints and sages have been. They have been at a very high level of consciousness. But then here he's talking about not those select few, but of the multitude. Forerunners of a divine multitude. These pioneers, these flaming pioneers are the forerunners. That is, they are the precursors, the beginning of a divine multitude, the massive barrier breakers of the world. These are the ones who break all the barriers of convention, limited and limiting mental thinking, and the barriers created by religions. These will be pioneers who will take the world away from all religions towards spirituality. So these are the types of breaking of barriers which you are looking at in the human race, the race of the future. And these are the sun-eyed children of a marvelous dawn, as is called them. The sun-eyed children of a marvelous dawn, and I'm sure many of you are amongst those sun-eyed children of that marvelous dawn, who will be the barrier breakers of the world. Thank you.
My name is Trisha Gandhi. I am from School of Liberal Arts. I am doing bachelor's in psychology. So the question I want to ask you is, what inspired you to do research or read about the works of Sri Aurobindo and the mother? And what was that point when you decided that I want to leave my medical career and want to become a part of integral yoga education or the spiritual aspect of it?
Well, in one word, these are things which are predestined, so that's how it happened. But if looked at on the surface, I can just point out a few milestones. The milestones would be, firstly, early childhood. I was interested in matters religious and spiritual since early childhood. So it means that maybe some preparation which had been going on in previous lives so brought me in that frame of mind to this world. The second milestone was perhaps 1992 when I turned to Sri Aurobindo. So because of the early preparation and the reading that I had been doing earlier, that made me take to the teachings of Sri Aurobindo and the mother as a fish takes to water, because that preparation was already there. And the fact that I came to them at the age of 45 in 1992, I was 45, not earlier, was perhaps also with a design. Sri Aurobindo and mother knew when to catch me, because without that early preparation I would not have understood, at least not understood Sri Aurobindo. is difficult to understand. That is true. So that preparation was necessary. So 1992 came a difficult phase of life, and I was looking at the Sunday newspaper. It had those days, daily events column, and one of the items listed was satsang at 10 a.m. Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. I knew vaguely where the place is. I'd never been there, although I had been in All India Institute for 27 years before that. I joined there as an MBBS student in 1965, 65 to 92, 27 years, not blind to matters religious and spiritual, interested in that since childhood, but never went to Sri Aurobindo Ashram even once. Predestined, you see. But suddenly one day I'm going through a difficult phase of life and I'm seeing this satsang there. Okay, let me go there, I'll get some peace of mind. And I decide to go there. And then I'm very pleasantly surprised because I didn't generally go to places like this. I thought reading was enough. Reading and trying to bring it in my life on the basis of reading. I didn't go to such places. I had some aversion to this type of places. I came here and in for a pleasant surprise. It says 10 o'clock. The satsang started punctually at 10 on the dot. Punctual. No big crowds, no rituals, no ceremonies, no expectations, no religion being talked about, only spirituality. And I discovered the satsang was not only that Sunday, every Sunday. So started going every Sunday, then started buying books, started reading, and that's how it continued. About leaving the medical profession, that really never happened. Again, I think as it had been designed in such a way that tendencies were of course there, but in the medical profession somehow I turned to nutrition, although my department was basically a department of neurophysiology. But I turned to nutrition. My research was on human beings, not on animals, which physiologists generally do. And in nutrition, I was looking at nutrition in relation to chronic disease, particularly diabetes and heart disease. That was the type of research I was doing. Then that field started expanding, and by around 1990, it had expanded enough for people to realize that nutrition is only one of the lifestyle factors contributing to chronic disease, and there are other lifestyle factors which are also important, and therefore the world was looking at healthy lifestyles. And one of the lifestyles that they had looked at was yoga. In 92, I came to the ashram. After reading Sri Aurobindo and the mother, I understood how yoga can become a part of life, how it can be a lifestyle, how it can relieve stress. I understood that. So that led to a convergence of my personal and professional life. I also expanded from yoga to lifestyle as a whole, and the lifestyle I chose was yogic. And that's how that culminated in the establishment of that patient care facility, which was referred to the Integral Health Clinic at AIIMS New Delhi in the year 2000. So 8 years after going to the ashram, that clinic was established there. Once that clinic was established, I started feeling, well, why do I have to go on working here? This clinic has been established, it will have a momentum of its own, it will continue. Why not quit? I don't have to wait till retirement. So that's how I took early retirement in 2005. That clinic had been running for 5 years and it is running even now. I knew it has a momentum, it will not stop. So that clinic is still running, and in the 2005 I took. So as you can see, it was not leaving one career and going another. From nutrition to lifestyle as a whole, and lifestyle was yoga, and then leaving. So it was a seamless extension.
Supposing I am marked with the egocentricity, and I want to move away from the egocentricity. But my rationalizing mind would not let me recognize the ego. So how would I work on it?
Well, one feels that one does not have an ego. I said, my rationalizing mind will not let me see that ego. That happens a lot because we feel that I'm only working on the basis of reason, and that my ideas, my opinions are genuinely better than those of others. That's also an expression of ego. And if I have certain needs of my own, they should be met. If I don't love, I know this has become a common expression, love yourself. If you can't love yourself, whom else can you? How can you love others? So you say, yes, so loving myself is being supported by society, all intelligent people are talking about that. And therefore, one can have an ego and yet a rationalizing mind, either defend it or deny it. And in fact, the entire Western psychology, if you look at it till recently, was based on this idea that ego is to be consolidated and developed, otherwise you do not have a properly well-formed personality. So that again further strengthens this idea. But then at the same time, if you look at it a little more closely, you'll find that while development of the ego goes a long way in giving us worldly achievements, because unless I feel that I am a distinct individual and therefore to achieve this and that, I need to work hard, I need to do this and that, one would not be able to achieve much in life. So ego does play a very important role in our achievements. That is one. The second thing is that even in worldly life, we also realize that along with the expression of the ego, we also need ego control. In childhood, we realize that if in the game I say that I will not follow the rules of the game, say if it is cricket, I will only bat, I will not bowl, nobody will play with me. So the child learns to not eliminate the ego, but control the ego. And the same happens when you are working in an organization. If you do not control your ego, you will not have any good interpersonal relationships with anybody. So at least controlling the ego is something which a child realizes early in life, and you continue to control it to some extent. If for nothing else, at least to have comfortable working conditions, a comfortable life. Whether it is with the family, with the wife and children, or whether it is with the colleagues at the workplace, you control your ego. So ego control is something that we all need. Now, ego control along with the ego helps and can go a long way in letting us go successfully in life. But then how about the spiritual sphere? In the spiritual sphere also, to start with, it is the ego that helps us enter that path. Because when you say that all this material achievement has not given me much, it has not given me a sense of fulfillment, although I achieved a lot in the material sphere, still I feel there's some emptiness in my life. Where does that emptiness come from? What is it that I still want, what is it that I should still get? Then that is when you start exploring these questions, you feel that, well, there's something deeper within which is still not satisfied, and therefore I'll give my life a new turn. I'll give my life a new direction. Now when you say, I will give my life a new direction, that is again the ego speaking. So it's the ego that puts us on that path. Then for a long time, this tool, the ego, which helped us on the worldly path, also continues to help us on the spiritual path. Initiation and will continue. When does the time come to start shedding the ego? The time comes to shed the ego. Till then it's only ego control and sort of expressing more and more of love. That love may also have an egoistic aspect to it. That I am loving, I am giving. So till then, the ego is helping us live in the spiritual life. But then the time to start shedding it comes when you start feeling uneasy. एक छटपटाहट होने लगती है अंदर. And when does that happen? When you find that it is leading to an obstruction, a hurdle in further spiritual growth. And the primary barrier for that is attachments. Attachment to possessions and attachment to close relationships. These are the two major barriers that come. So then you start feeling that these things are not letting me move further. So when you find that uneasiness starts, that is the time when this time for shedding that ego comes. So don't be so afraid of the ego. It's a much maligned entity, but then the ego has been planted there with a purpose which helps us in worldly life and with a purpose which helps us also in spiritual life. So that's why Sri Aurobindo said ego is the helper, ego is the mar. It helps us to a point. When the time comes to shed it, then it becomes the time comes to the time when it should be shed is when you start feeling it's a barrier. So till you feel it's not a barrier, you can continue with it. And this background helps us in controlling it as well as weakening it as we go along. Because every expression of love in a way weakens the barrier, because it dissolves the barrier between you as the lover and the one whom you are loving. So it breaks that barrier. So barrier keeps weakening. That process is going on.